The blood on Willow Bennett's hands had long since dried when she stumbled into Evanston, Wyoming on a stolen horse, but the weight of what she had done pressed against her ribs with every ragged breath. The September sun of 1878 beat down mercilessly as she guided the exhausted mare through the dusty streets, her dark hair plastered to her neck beneath a borrowed hat, her dress torn at the hem and stained with trail dust and something darker she tried not to think about. She had killed a man 3 days ago, put a bullet through his chest when he had come at her brother with a knife in that saloon in Cheyenne. And though every lawman west of the Mississippi would call it murder, she knew in her bones it had been the only choice between breathing and dying. The town sprawled before her like a mirage, buildings weathered gray by wind and time, false fronts casting shadows across the rutted Main Street. She needed water, needed food, needed to disappear before the U.S. Marshals picked up her trail. But most of all, she needed someone to believe her when she said she was not a murderer despite what the law would claim. The man she had shot had been reaching for her younger brother Samuel, had been drunk and furious over a card game gone wrong, and when he had drawn that knife with murder in his bloodshot eyes, Willow had grabbed the nearest gun and pulled the trigger without thinking. Samuel had run, disappeared into the night like smoke, and she had been left standing over a body with a dozen witnesses who saw only a woman with a smoking pistol and a dead man at her feet. She dismounted outside a small general store, her legs trembling with exhaustion, and tried to look like just another traveler passing through. The proprietor, a thin man with wire spectacles, barely glanced at her as she purchased jerky and hardtack with the few coins she had left. Her stomach cramped with hunger, but she forced herself to eat slowly, to not draw attention by wolfing down the food like the desperate fugitive she was. Through the store window, she watched the street, watched for the glint of marshal badges, for the purposeful stride of lawmen on a hunt. "You look like you have been riding hard," the proprietor said, his voice neutral but his eyes curious. "Heading somewhere particular?" "Just passing through," Willow replied, keeping her voice steady despite the fear threading through her chest. "Looking for work, maybe." "Heard there might be ranches hiring." "Plenty of ranches out this way. Vance place is about 5 miles north, big spread. Fletcher Vance runs it with his brothers, though I heard the brothers moved on to Colorado last year. He might need help with the horses. He always needs help with the horses." The name meant nothing to her, but north sounded good, away from Cheyenne, away from the main roads where marshals would be searching. She thanked him and stepped back into the crushing heat, leading the stolen mare toward the livery stable to see if she could trade for a fresher mount, or at least get this one watered and rested. The liveryman, a grizzled man with tobacco-stained teeth, eyed the horse with the knowing gaze of someone who recognized quality. "That is a fine animal," he said slowly. "Mighty fine for someone just passing through." "She was my father's," Willow lied, the words coming easier than they should have. "He passed last month. She is all I have left." Something in the man's expression softened. "Sorry for your loss, miss. I can water her, give her some grain. You planning to stay in Evanston, maybe for a bit?" "Looking for work. Try the Vance Ranch. Fletcher is a fair man, hard but fair. Lost his wife 2 years back, been running that place alone since his brothers left. Could probably use someone who knows their way around horses and is not afraid of hard work." The word alone caught her attention. A man alone might not ask too many questions, might need help enough to overlook a woman with shadows in her eyes and no past she could safely discuss. She paid the liveryman a few cents for the care, then asked for directions to the Vance Ranch. He sketched a rough map in the dirt with a stick, showing her the fork in the road, the creek that ran alongside the property, the gate marked with a burned brand showing a V inside a circle. The ride out of town felt like shedding a skin. The buildings fell away behind her, replaced by rolling prairie dotted with sage and rabbit brush, the mountains rising purple and distant to the east. The air smelled of dust and dried grass and somewhere, faintly, of water. Her body ached from days in the saddle, from sleeping on hard ground with one eye open, from the constant tension of waiting for the sound of pursuit. The mare plodded steadily north, following the rutted wagon track that served as a road, and Willow let herself imagine, just for a moment, that she could stop running, that she could find a place to catch her breath and figure out what came next. The Vance Ranch announced itself with a split-rail fence that stretched toward the horizon, enclosing grassland where cattle grazed in scattered clusters. The main house sat back from the road, a solid structure of logs and stone with a covered porch and a chimney that spoke of cold winters weathered. Outbuildings clustered nearby: a barn, a stable, a bunkhouse, a smokehouse, all well-maintained but showing the wear of constant use. Horses moved in a large corral, their coats gleaming in the afternoon sun, and Willow felt her breath catch at their beauty. Bays and chestnuts and one striking palomino, all well-muscled and alert, the kind of horses that came from careful breeding and patient training. A man emerged from the stable as she approached, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair that needed cutting, and several days' worth of beard shadowing his jaw. He wore dusty work clothes, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up over tanned forearms, and he moved with the easy confidence of someone entirely at home in his surroundings. His eyes, she noticed as she drew closer, were a startling gray, the color of storm clouds, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to turn the mare around and ride back the way she had come. "Help you?" His voice was deep, roughened by years of calling commands across open land. Willow forced herself to sit straight in the saddle despite her exhaustion. "I heard you might need help with the horses. I grew up around them, know how to train and gentle them, how to handle the difficult ones." Fletcher Vance looked her over with those storm cloud eyes, taking in her travel-stained dress, her borrowed hat, the mare beneath her that was clearly too fine to belong to someone seeking work. "You have a name, Willow." She left off the Bennett, left off anything that could be traced back to Cheyenne and the body cooling in an undertaker's back room. "Willow Brooks." The lie came smoothly, her mother's maiden name feeling safer than her own. "You running from something, Willow Brooks?" The question was blunt. No malice in it, but no mercy either. Just a man who had seen enough of life to recognize trouble when it rode up to his gate. Her throat tightened. She could lie again, spin another story about a dead father or a failed farm, but something in his steady gaze made her choose a different path. "Yes," she said quietly, "but not from anything I started. I am not a thief, not a cheat. I just need a chance to work and keep my head down for a while." Fletcher was silent for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded toward the stable. "Put your horse up. There is a room in the back of the house, used to be for my wife's sister when she visited. You can have that. Pay is $20 a month plus room and board. Work starts before dawn and ends after dusk. I do not tolerate drinking, laziness, or lying. You cause trouble, you are gone." Clear. Relief flooded through her so suddenly she felt dizzy. "Clear, thank you, Mr. Vance." "Fletcher." "Nobody calls me Mr. except the banker, and I do not like him much." He turned back toward the stable, then paused. "You know how to cook?" "Well enough not to poison anyone." "Good. That makes you better than me already." There might have been the ghost of a smile at the corner of his mouth, but it vanished before she could be sure. The room he showed her was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand with a chipped basin, and a window that looked out over the horse corral. It was more than she had hoped for, more than she deserved given the lie she was living. She unpacked her few belongings: a spare shirt, a brush with half the bristles missing, the small daguerreotype of her mother that she had grabbed when she fled. And she tried not to think about Samuel, about whether he had made it to safety, about whether he blamed her for pulling that trigger. Fletcher worked her hard from the first morning. She was up before the sun, helping him feed and water the horses, mucking out stalls, mending tack, breaking ice from the water troughs as autumn deepened toward winter. He spoke little, but she learned to read him anyway, learned the set of his shoulders when he was pleased with how a training session went, the slight narrowing of his eyes when a horse was favoring a leg or showing signs of illness. He was patient with the animals in a way that surprised her, gentle even with the half-wild 3-year-old gelding they were trying to saddle-train, his voice low and soothing as he worked the skittish creature in the round pen. "You have to let them know you are not going to hurt them," he explained one afternoon as Willow watched from the rail. "They have been hurt before, or they are just scared of what they do not understand. You come at them with force, they will fight you until one of you breaks. You come at them with patience, show them you are steady and safe. They will give you everything they have." She thought about that as she helped him ease a saddle blanket onto the gelding's back for the 100th time, the horse trembling but holding still beneath Fletcher's hands. There was a metaphor there about trust and fear, about the walls people built to protect themselves, but she pushed it away and focused on the work. The first week passed, then the second. October arrived with cold winds and the threat of early snow. Willow fell into the rhythm of ranch life, her body hardening to the labor, her hands developing new calluses. Fletcher remained a mystery, a man who existed in his work and little else, who rarely smiled but was never unkind, who sometimes looked at her with something that might have been curiosity before turning away. She cooked simple meals in the ranch house kitchen, stews and biscuits and the occasional roast, and they ate together in silence broken only by necessary conversation about which horses needed attention or which fence line needed repair. She thought about Samuel every night, lying awake in her small room and wondering if he had made it to their aunt in Kansas, if he was safe, if he hated her for what she had done. She thought about the man she had killed, tried to remember his face and could only recall the rage in it, the knife gleaming in the lamplight. She had not meant to kill him, had only meant to stop him, but her aim had been truer than she intended, and he had dropped like a stone. The law would not care about intentions, would not care that she had been protecting her brother. A woman with a gun was dangerous, and dangerous women got hanged. Fletcher found her crying in the barn one evening, tears streaming silently down her face as she brushed one of the mares. She had not heard him approach, and when his hand touched her shoulder, she flinched so violently the mare shied sideways. "Easy," he said, the same tone he used with frightened horses. "Easy, Willow. You are safe here." But she was not safe, would never be safe as long as those marshals were hunting her. The words poured out before she could stop them, the whole story spilling into the dusty air of the barn, Cheyenne and the saloon and the knife and the gun and Samuel running into the night. Fletcher listened without interrupting, his expression unchanging, and when she finally ran out of words and stood there shaking, waiting for him to tell her to leave, to turn her in, to look at her with disgust or fear, he simply pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and handed it to her. "That man had it coming," Fletcher said quietly. "You saved your brother's life. That is not murder, no matter what some judge might say. The law does not see it that way. The law is not always right." He was quiet for a moment, his hand still resting on her shoulder, warm and solid and anchoring. "I lost my wife to a man like that. Drunk, angry, thought he had a right to take what he wanted. He cornered her in town, tried to force himself on her. She fought him off, but he came back later with a gun, shot her on the steps of the church in broad daylight. The law said it was murder, but he claimed she had led him on, that she had promised him something and gone back on her word. He got 5 years, served 3. Willow looked up at him, saw the old pain carved into the lines of his face, the anger that still simmered beneath his calm exterior. "I am sorry. I am sorry, too. Sorry that the world has men like that in it. Sorry that you had to do what you did. But I am not sorry you are here, and I am not going to let anyone take you if I can help it." His hand tightened briefly on her shoulder, then dropped away. "You are under my protection now. Anyone wants to question that, they will have to go through me." Something cracked open in her chest, some frozen place that had been locked tight since she fled Cheyenne. She nodded, not trusting her voice, and turned back to the mare. Fletcher stood there for another moment, then walked away, his boots echoing on the barn floor. That night, she slept dreamlessly for the first time in weeks. The Marshals came on a cold morning in late October, 3 of them riding up the road with the sun at their backs, their badges glinting silver against their dark coats. Willow was in the stable when she saw them through the open door, and her heart stopped beating for a long second, before slamming into frantic rhythm. Fletcher was in the round pen working with the gelding, his back to the approaching riders, and she ran to him without thinking, her voice urgent and low. "Marshals, 3 of them, coming up the road." Fletcher's expression did not change, but his whole body went still in a way that reminded her of a wolf scenting danger. "Get in the house. The room I showed you that first day, the one I use for storage now, it has a loose board under the rug by the window. Pull it up. There is space beneath, enough for you to hide. Get under there and do not make a sound no matter what you hear. Understand, Fletcher, I cannot ask you to lie for me. You are not asking. I am telling. Go now." She ran, her boots pounding across the packed dirt of the yard, up the porch steps, through the front door. The storage room was cluttered with crates and old furniture, but she found the rug easily enough, rolled it back to reveal the wide plank floor beneath. Her fingers scrabbled at the boards until she found the one that shifted, lifted it to reveal a dark space that smelled of earth and old wood. She dropped down into it, pulling the board back into place above her head, then freezing as the rug settled back over everything. The darkness was complete, pressing against her eyes, and she could hear her own breathing too loud in the confined space. Footsteps on the porch, the creak of the door opening, voices, Fletcher's deep and calm, and another voice she did not recognize, sharp with authority. "Morning, Fletcher. Been a while. Marshal Hawkins, did not expect to see you out this way. Got a situation. Hunting a fugitive woman named Willow Bennett. Shot a man in Cheyenne 3 weeks back, fled on a stolen horse. We have been tracking her through this territory. Trail went cold around Evanston." A pause. "You seen anyone new around here? Woman traveling alone, maybe looking for work." Beneath the floorboards, Willow pressed her hand against her mouth to muffle her breathing. Her heart hammered so hard she was certain they could hear it through the wood. "No," Fletcher said, his voice even and unbothered. "Nobody like that. I have been running this place alone since spring." "Why, what did this woman do?" "Murdered a man in cold blood. Witnesses said they were arguing over her brother, some kind of card game dispute. She pulled a gun and shot him right in the chest. Brother ran off, and she took a horse from the livery and disappeared. Sounds like more than a simple murder if her brother was involved. What started the argument? Does not matter what started it. Killing a man is killing a man." The marshal's voice held an edge of impatience. You are sure you have not seen anyone matching her description? Dark hair, brown eyes, mid-20s, might have been dressed in men's clothing or a travel-stained dress, I am sure. Like I said, been alone out here. It gets quiet, but I like it that way after. Fletcher let the sentence trail off, an old grief implied in the silence. I heard about Rebecca. That was a bad business. The marshal's voice softened slightly. But if this woman shows up, you need to let us know. She is dangerous, Fletcher. She already killed once. Could do it again. If I see anyone matching that description, I will send word into town. You have my word on that. There was something in Fletcher's tone that Willow could not identify, a subtle emphasis that almost sounded like mockery, but the marshal seemed to accept it, appreciate it. We are going to check with some of the other ranches in the area, then head south. Keep your eyes open. Always do. More footsteps, the door closing, the sound of horses moving away down the road. Willow stayed frozen in the darkness, counting her heartbeats, waiting for Fletcher to come and tell her it was safe. Minutes stretched like hours. Finally, the board above her head lifted and Fletcher's face appeared, backlit by the morning light streaming through the window. They are gone, heading south toward Rawlins. She climbed out of the space on shaking legs, dust and cobwebs clinging to her dress, her whole body trembling with reaction. You lied to them. You looked a U.S. Marshal in the eye and lied. I did not lie. I said I had not seen anyone matching that description. The woman I know is named Willow Brooks, not Willow Bennett, and she is no murderer. His expression was serious, but there was something fierce and protective in his eyes that made her chest ache. They will keep looking, but not here, not for a while anyway. You bought yourself some time. Why? The word came out raw. Why would you risk that for me? You barely know me. Fletcher looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression, some wall coming down behind those storm cloud eyes. Because I know what it is like to lose someone to men who think they can take what they want. Because I know what it is like to watch the law fail to deliver justice. Because you are a good person who made an impossible choice, and you do not deserve to hang for protecting your brother. He paused, then added more quietly, and because I would be a fool to let you go now that you are here. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Willow felt heat rise in her cheeks, felt something unfurl in her chest that had nothing to do with gratitude or relief, and everything to do with the way Fletcher was looking at her, like she was something precious and worth protecting. She had not let herself think about him that way, had pushed down every flutter of awareness when their hands brushed passing tools, every skip of her pulse when he smiled his rare, quiet smile. But now, standing in this dusty storage room with the space beneath the floorboards still gaping open like a grave she had escaped, she could not deny what was growing between them. I do not want to bring trouble to your door, she said softly. If they come back, if they find out you lied, let me worry about that. You just focus on staying safe and helping me with these damned horses. Fletcher smiled then, a real smile that transformed his face from stern to something warmer, more open. Besides, you make better biscuits than I do, and that alone is worth the risk. She laughed despite everything, a startled sound that dissolved the worst of the tension. Is that all I am good for? Biscuits and horse training? That remains to be seen, Fletcher said, and the way he looked at her made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could stop running and start living again. The weeks that followed brought a strange kind of peace. The Marshals did not return, and the work of the ranch consumed their days with its endless demands. Winter crept closer, the nights growing longer and colder, frost painting elaborate patterns on the windows each morning. Fletcher taught her how to shoe a horse, how to read the subtle signs of colic or founder, how to doctor a wire cut and treat thrush. She taught him how to make a decent pot of coffee and how to cook something other than overboiled beef. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, and sometimes Fletcher would tell her stories about the ranch, about growing up here with his brothers, about the year the wolves came down from the mountains and killed half their cattle before they managed to drive them off. "You miss them?" she asked one evening as they sat on the porch after dinner, watching the sun set in bands of orange and crimson across the western sky. "Your brothers?" "Sometimes. But they had their own lives to live, their own dreams. Daniel wanted to try mining in Colorado, thought he would strike it rich. Matthew wanted to see California, wanted to look at the ocean. I was the one who wanted to stay here, keep the ranch going. We wrote letters for a while, but—" he shrugged. "People drift apart, that is just how it is. What about you? Did you ever want something different?" Fletcher was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. "I thought I had everything I wanted when I married Rebecca. This land, a good woman, the promise of a family someday. Then she was gone, and for a while I could not see the point of any of it. Almost sold the place, almost walked away and let it all go to hell." He looked at her then, something vulnerable in his expression. "But you cannot outrun grief. You just have to keep living through it until one day you wake up and realize you want to keep going." Willow understood that kind of grief, the kind that carved holes in your life where people used to be. She thought about her mother, dead these 5 years from pneumonia, about her father who had followed 6 months later, his heart giving out from what she suspected was nothing more than loneliness. She thought about Samuel, wherever he was, and hoped he was safe and whole and not carrying too much guilt over what had happened in Cheyenne. "I wrote to my brother," she admitted. "Sent a letter to our aunt's address in Kansas, told him I was safe and he should not worry. I do not know if he got it. I do not know if he will write back. He will if he can. Family is family, even when everything goes wrong." They sat in silence as the stars emerged one by one overhead, the Milky Way a river of light arcing across the darkness. Willow felt the cold seeping through her shawl, but she did not want to go inside, did not want to break the fragile intimacy of the moment. Fletcher sat close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell the familiar scent of leather and hay and horse that clung to him. She found herself noticing details she had tried to ignore. The way his hair curled slightly at his collar, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the strength in his hands when he worked with the horses. "Willow," Fletcher said quietly, and when she turned to look at him, his expression was serious, almost pained. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear it even if it makes things complicated." Her heart stuttered. "All right. I did not plan for this, did not want it, honestly. After Rebecca, I thought I was done with feeling anything for anyone. But you—" He paused, searching for words. "You have become important to me, more than just someone who works here, more than just someone I am protecting. And I know the timing is terrible, know you have enough to deal with without me adding to it, but I cannot keep pretending I do not feel what I feel." Willow stared at him, her mind racing. She had suspected, had felt the weight of his attention shifting from professional to something deeper, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that both terrified and thrilled her. "Fletcher, you do not have to say anything," he interrupted gently. "I just needed you to know. Needed to be honest, because I cannot stand one more day of hiding how I look at you, how I think about you when I should be focused on work. If you do not feel the same way, that is fine. Nothing has to change. But if you do—" He reached out and took her hand, his palm warm and calloused against hers. "If you do, then we can figure out what comes next together." She looked down at their joined hands, at the contrast of his tanned skin against her paler fingers, and felt something settle into place inside her, some piece of her fractured life finally finding where it belonged. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I've been trying not to, trying to keep my distance because everything is so complicated and dangerous, but I feel it too." Fletcher exhaled slowly, as if he had been holding his breath. "Well then, all right." He smiled, that rare warm smile that made her feel like the sun had come out in the middle of the night. "We will take it slow, figure it out as we go. No rush, no pressure, just—" He squeezed her hand. "Just this." She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat, and they sat together under the stars while the temperature dropped, and the coyotes began their nightly singing in the hills. When she finally stood to go inside, Fletcher rose with her, and at the door he hesitated for a moment before leaning down to press a soft kiss to her forehead, a gesture so tender and careful it made her want to cry. "Sleep well, Willow Brooks," he murmured against her skin. "You too, Fletcher Vance." November arrived with snow that fell in fat, wet flakes, blanketing the ranch in white silence. The work became harder, more physically demanding as they battled the elements to keep the animals fed and warm. Fletcher showed her how to break ice from the water troughs with an axe, how to shovel paths from the house to the barn and stable, how to wrap the horses' legs to prevent frostbite on the coldest nights. They worked together with a new awareness, stealing touches when they passed each other, lingering over shared meals, talking late into the evenings about everything and nothing. Fletcher courted her in the slow, old-fashioned way of ranchers and frontiersmen, bringing her small gifts from his rare trips to town. A length of blue ribbon for her hair, a book of poetry with a worn leather cover, a bag of peppermint sticks that made her laugh with delight. She mended his shirts and sewed buttons back on his winter coat, cooked his favorite meals, left wildflowers on his nightstand when she could find them still blooming in sheltered spots. They danced around each other like the half-trained horses in the corral, cautious and hopeful, testing the boundaries of this new thing growing between them. The first time he kissed her properly was in the barn on a night when the temperature had dropped below zero and they were checking on a mare close to foaling. The mare was restless but not yet in labor, and they stood together in the stall, watching her pace in the golden lamplight. Fletcher had been telling a story about his first horse, a fractious paint that had bucked him off every morning for a month straight, and Willow was laughing, her breath misting in the cold air, when he turned to her with such naked longing in his eyes that her laughter died. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with want. "I have been thinking about it for weeks, and I cannot stand not knowing any more." Instead of answering, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, felt him go still with surprise before his arms came around her, pulling her close. He kissed her like she was something rare and breakable, tender and careful, and she melted into him, her hands fisting in his coat. The kiss deepened, grew more urgent, years of loneliness and loss transmuting into desperate need. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to marry you," he said, not a question but a statement of fact. "When all this is sorted out, when it is safe, I am going to make you my wife if you will have me." Willow's heart felt too large for her chest. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will have you." They kissed again, slower this time, savoring it, and the mare snorted disapprovingly behind them as if to say they should be paying attention to her instead. They laughed and pulled apart, and Fletcher ran his thumb along Willow's jaw in a gesture so affectionate it made her ache. "We should probably focus on the horse," he said reluctantly. "Probably," Willow agreed, but neither of them moved for a long moment, too caught in the gravity of each other to care about anything else. The mare foaled without incident 2 days later, a sturdy colt with a white blaze and black stockings that looked like he had waded through ink. Fletcher was beside himself with pride, examining the newborn with the care of a man handling precious treasure, and Willow felt her love for him deepen watching him work. He was so gentle with the vulnerable things of the world, so patient and kind, and she could easily imagine him holding a child someday with that same tender devotion. The thought should have frightened her, should have felt like tempting fate when her future was so uncertain, but instead it filled her with a fierce, bright hope she had not felt since before Cheyenne. Maybe this could work. Maybe she could build a life here, become someone new, leave Willow Bennett and all her mistakes buried in the past like the space beneath the floorboards where she had hidden from the Marshals. Maybe Fletcher was right, and the law would move on, focus on other criminals, other crimes, and forget about one woman who had defended her brother in a saloon. Winter deepened into December, and Fletcher took her into town for supplies and to attend the Christmas social at the church. She was nervous about being seen, about someone recognizing her from a wanted poster or a description, but Fletcher held her hand through the whole evening, introduced her as his intended, and no one looked at her with suspicion or fear. The women of the town were kind, welcoming her with casseroles and baking advice and offers to teach her quilting. The men shook Fletcher's hand and clapped him on the shoulder, clearly pleased to see him happy again after years of mourning. It felt almost normal, almost like the life she had imagined for herself before everything went wrong on the ride home, bundled in blankets with the wagon creaking beneath them. Fletcher pulled her close and kissed her temple. "You did beautifully tonight. Everyone loved you. I was terrified someone would know who I am. They know who you are. You are Willow Brooks, the woman who is going to marry me and help me run the best horse ranch in Wyoming. That is all they need to know." She wished she could believe it was that simple, but she smiled and nestled closer to his warmth, letting herself pretend for a little while longer. The Marshals came back in January, but this time it was only Marshal Hawkins and one deputy, and they looked tired and frustrated. Willow saw them from the stable and ran for the house, but Fletcher caught her arm before she could disappear. "Wait, I do not think they are here for you. Look at them." She forced herself to stop to observe and realized he was right. The Marshals rode slowly, almost reluctantly, and when Fletcher walked out to meet them, their greeting was weary rather than aggressive. "Fletcher, we are not going to bother you long. Just wanted to let you know we are calling off the active search for Willow Bennett. Trail has gone completely cold, and we have other cases that need attention. If you see or hear anything, you know where to find me, but between you and me, I think she probably froze to death somewhere out in the wilderness." Half the folks in Cheyenne have come forward saying that man she shot was a mean drunk with a history of violence. Prosecutor might not even press for murder if we did find her, could argue down to manslaughter, maybe even self-defense. Hawkins shrugged. "Not that it matters now." "She is probably dead," Fletcher nodded gravely. "Rough country out there for a woman alone. I appreciate you letting me know." "Sure thing. You have a good winter, Fletcher, and congratulations on your engagement. I heard in town. Glad you found someone." "Thank you, Marshal. Travel safe." She watched from the shadows of the stable as the Marshals rode away, her entire body shaking with relief so intense it felt like illness. They thought she was dead. They had given up. She was free, or as free as she could be while living under a false name and a fabricated past. When the riders disappeared over the ridge, she walked out into the yard on unsteady legs, and Fletcher caught her as her knees buckled. "Easy, easy, I have got you. You are all right. You are safe." "They think I am dead," she gasped against his chest. "Fletcher, they think I am dead. Good. Let them keep thinking that. Willow Bennett died in the wilderness, and Willow Brooks is going to live a long, happy life right here with me." He tilted her face up, his eyes fierce with promise. "You are mine now, and I protect what is mine." She kissed him there in the middle of the yard with the January sun cold and bright overhead, kissed him with all the gratitude and love and relief surging through her. He kissed her back with a passion barely leashed, then swept her up in his arms and carried her toward the house, both of them laughing breathlessly. They were married in March when the first wildflowers pushed through the snow. A small ceremony in the Evanston church with a handful of neighbors as witnesses. Willow wore a simple cream-colored dress she had sewn herself, and Fletcher wore his best suit, brushed clean of dust and smelling faintly of cedar from the trunk where it had been stored. The Reverend spoke about love and commitment and weathering storms together, and when Fletcher slipped a gold band on her finger, Willow felt tears stream down her face, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming rightness of the moment. "I love you," Fletcher murmured as they signed the marriage certificate, Willow Brooks written in her careful hand, legal and binding and real. "I am going to love you every day for the rest of my life." "I love you too," she whispered back, "more than I thought possible." The wedding supper was held at the ranch, a feast prepared by neighboring women who brought roasted chickens and ham and pies and cakes, until the table groaned under the weight. There was dancing in the barn, a fiddler playing reels and waltzes, and Fletcher spun her around until she was dizzy and laughing. When the guests finally left, and they were alone in the house for the first time as husband and wife, Fletcher carried her over the threshold with exaggerated ceremony, making her laugh again. "I have been waiting for this," he said, setting her down gently in the bedroom they would now share, his hands framing her face. "Waiting to have you here, completely mine, no more holding back." Willow reached up to loosen his collar, her fingers trembling slightly with anticipation and nerves. "I am yours. I have been yours since you hid me beneath those floorboards and lied to the Marshals, maybe even before that." He kissed her deeply, hungrily, and she responded with equal fervor, both of them shedding clothing between kisses and whispered endearments. Fletcher was careful with her, attentive and tender, learning what made her gasp and arch against him, and she explored him in turn, marveling at the strength of his body, the scars that mapped his history, the way he shuddered when she touched him in certain places. They came together with a passion built from months of restraint, from near loss and second chances, and afterward lay tangled in the sheets, Fletcher tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder while she dozed against his chest. "Are you happy?" he asked softly. "Happier than I have ever been," she replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Spring arrived with a rush of green, the prairie transforming from brown to lush with new grass, wildflowers painting the hills in swaths of color. The horses thrived, their coats glossy, the foals growing strong and playful in the warming weather. Fletcher and Willow worked the ranch together as a true partnership now, making decisions jointly, building plans for the future. They talked about expanding the herd, about buying the adjacent property that had recently come up for sale, about maybe hiring a hand or two to help with the workload. In May, Willow received a letter from Samuel, forwarded through their aunt. She tore it open with shaking hands, relief flooding through her at the sight of his familiar handwriting. He was safe in Kansas, working on a freight line, and he was sorry, so desperately sorry for what had happened in Cheyenne. He had wanted to turn himself in, to tell the authorities it was his fault, but their aunt had talked him out of it, convinced him it would only make things worse. He hoped she was well, hoped she had found somewhere safe to land. He loved her and missed her, and would understand if she never wanted to hear from him again. Willow cried reading the letter, then read it to Fletcher, who held her while she grieved for all the time and distance now between her and her brother. "You should write back," Fletcher said. "Tell him you are married and happy, that you do not blame him. He needs to hear that." So she wrote, a long letter detailing her life on the ranch, her marriage, the horses and the land, and the unexpected joy she had found. She told Samuel she loved him, that she had never blamed him, that she had made her choice and would make it again if faced with the same situation. She signed it Willow Vance, and the name felt right, felt like claiming her new life fully. Summer brought hard work and long days, the rhythm of haying and cattle drives and endless fence repairs. Willow learned to ride better, to rope and brand, to read the weather and the land the way Fletcher did instinctively. She grew stronger, browner from the sun, her hands toughening to the labor. Fletcher watched her with undisguised pride, often stopping in the middle of a task just to look at her, to tell her she was beautiful covered in dust and sweat. She teased him for being foolish, but secretly she loved it, loved being seen and admired and treasured. In August, she realized her courses were late. At first, she did not want to hope, did not want to get her expectations up only to be disappointed. But when another week passed and then two, she allowed herself to wonder. She was careful not to lift anything too heavy, to avoid the rankest horse that liked to buck, and Fletcher noticed immediately. "Are you all right? You have been moving like you are made of glass for days now." She bit her lip, then decided honesty was better than evasion. "I think I might be with child. I'm not certain yet, but the signs are there." Fletcher went absolutely still, his eyes wide. "Truly, you think?" "I think so. We will know for sure in another month or so, but yes, I think so." He let out a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the corral, then caught her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. "A baby! We are going to have a baby!" He set her down carefully, his hands immediately going to her still flat stomach with wonder. "You are sure you are all right? You need to rest more. Let me handle the heavy work." "I am pregnant, not made of porcelain," Willow said, amused by his sudden overprotectiveness. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I will be fine." But she let him fuss over her anyway. Let him insist she eat more and rest in the afternoons. And she watched him start planning for their child with the same careful attention he gave to training horses. He built a cradle from oak wood, sanding it smooth and carving their initials into the headboard. He cleared out the small room next to theirs and painted the walls a soft yellow. He rode into town and came back with baby clothes and blankets and a stuffed horse that made Willow laugh until she cried. "You are going to spoil this child rotten," she accused, holding up a tiny embroidered gown. "Absolutely," Fletcher agreed, grinning. "I plan to spoil both of you rotten for the rest of my life." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through fall and into winter. Willow's belly swelled, a perfect round curve that Fletcher loved to rest his hands on, feeling for the baby's movements. The child was active, kicking and rolling, and Fletcher swore he could already tell the baby was going to be strong and stubborn like its mother. The first snow fell in November, and Willow sat by the fire with knitting needles and soft yarn, making blankets and tiny hats while Fletcher read to her from books of poetry and adventure. In February, when the snow lay deep and the world seemed locked in ice, Willow went into labor. Fletcher rode through a blizzard to fetch the midwife from town, a capable woman named Martha who arrived bundled in furs and bristling with efficiency. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next day, and Fletcher paced the house like a caged animal, desperate to help but knowing there was nothing he could do but wait. When the baby finally arrived with a furious wail, Martha cleaned the infant and wrapped it in blankets before presenting the bundle to Fletcher. "You have a son, a big, healthy boy with a fine set of lungs. Fletcher held his son with the same careful reverence he had shown the newborn colt, tears streaming unashamedly down his face. "He is perfect. Willow, he is perfect." She was exhausted, aching, but when Fletcher brought the baby to her and she looked down at the tiny red face, the shock of dark hair, the little fists waving indignantly, she felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "Hello, little one. We have been waiting for you." They named him Thomas, after Fletcher's father, and he became the center of their world. Fletcher was a devoted father, rising in the night to walk the floor with a crying baby, changing diapers without complaint, singing off-key lullabies that somehow always soothed Thomas back to sleep. Willow watched her husband with their son and fell even more deeply in love, seeing new dimensions to the man she had married. Spring came again, the cycle turning, and with it new life on the ranch. Foals were born, the cattle had their calves, and Thomas grew from a tiny infant into a sturdy baby with Fletcher's gray eyes and Willow's dark hair. Samuel came to visit in April, traveling from Kansas with a shy wife he had married the previous summer, and the reunion was tearful and joyful. Samuel held his nephew and apologized again for Cheyenne, and Willow stopped him with a hand on his arm. "It does not matter anymore. That is the past. This is our life now, and I would not change anything because it brought me here." She looked at Fletcher, who was showing Samuel's wife around the ranch, and smiled. "I have everything I ever wanted." Samuel hugged her tightly. "I am so glad, Willie, so glad you found this." The years rolled forward in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas learned to walk, chasing chickens in the yard and toddling after his father to the barns. Willow gave birth to a daughter in the summer of 1881, a delicate girl they named Caroline who had Fletcher's smile and a will of iron. Fletcher expanded the ranch, bought the adjacent property, hired 2 hands to help with the growing operation. The Vance Ranch became known throughout Wyoming for producing the finest horses, and buyers came from as far as Denver and Omaha to purchase their stock. Willow sometimes thought about her old life, about Willow Bennett who had shot a man and fled into the wilderness. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone from a story she had once heard rather than a life she had lived. She had become Willow Vance completely, a rancher's wife and mother, a woman respected in her community. No one questioned her past, and the wanted posters from Cheyenne had long since been taken down, the case closed, the fugitive presumed dead. She was free in every way that mattered. On a warm evening in September of 1883, Fletcher found her on the porch watching Thomas and Caroline play in the yard, their laughter bright in the golden hour light. He sat beside her and took her hand, lacing their fingers together in the familiar gesture that had become their own private language. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How lucky I am. How different my life could have been if I had not stumbled into Evanston that day, if you had not been willing to hide me and lie for me." Fletcher lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. "I am the lucky one. You gave me a reason to live again when I thought I was just going through the motions. You gave me a family, a purpose, a future worth waking up for." "I love you," Willow said, the words carrying the weight of 5 years of marriage, 2 children, countless shared sunrises and storms weathered together. "I will love you until the day I die and probably beyond that too." "Good," Fletcher said, his eyes crinkling with that rare, beautiful smile. "Because I plan to hold you to that promise for a very long time." They sat together as the sun set in streaks of orange and pink, their children playing at their feet, the ranch spreading around them in peaceful prosperity. Willow thought about hiding beneath the floorboards, about the terror of those minutes listening to Fletcher lie to the Marshals, about the leap of faith it had taken to trust him with her life. She thought about all the moments that had led her here, the tragedy and the grace, the fear and the hope, and she was grateful for every single one because they had brought her to this porch, this man, this family, this life. Thomas ran up the steps, his face flushed and happy. "Papa, can you teach me to ride the new colt tomorrow, please?" Fletcher laughed and ruffled his son's hair. "He is still too green for you, but I will tell you what. We will work with him together, and maybe by your birthday you will be ready. How does that sound?" "Yes." Thomas pumped his fist in triumph and ran back to tell Caroline, who was too young to understand but clapped anyway because her brother was excited. Willow leaned her head on Fletcher's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. This was happiness, she realized, not the absence of hardship or fear, but the presence of love strong enough to weather anything. They had built this together, brick by brick and day by day, and it was beautiful. In 1885, Willow gave birth to twin boys, Matthew and Daniel, named for Fletcher's brothers who visited that summer from their respective homes in California and Colorado. The ranch had to expand again to accommodate the growing family, and Fletcher added rooms to the house, built a larger bunkhouse for the additional hands they hired. Caroline proved to have a gift for training horses, following her father around from the time she could walk, absorbing everything he taught her. Thomas showed an interest in the business side, learning to keep books and negotiate sales with a shrewd mind that reminded Fletcher of his own father. Samuel and his wife had children too, and the families visited back and forth, creating a network of love and support that extended across state lines. Willow's aunt lived to see her great-nieces and nephews, passing peacefully in her sleep at the age of 76 with Willow holding her hand. Life continued its relentless march forward, bringing joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges, but through it all, Fletcher and Willow remained each other's anchor and refuge. In the summer of 1890, on their 7th wedding anniversary, Fletcher surprised Willow with a trip to Cheyenne. She had not been back since the night she fled, and her first instinct was to refuse, but Fletcher was insistent. "It is time," he said gently. "Time to lay that ghost to rest once and for all. The man you shot is long dead and buried, the case is closed, and no one is looking for you. You are not Willow Bennett anymore. You are Willow Vance, my wife, the mother of my children, and you have nothing to fear." So they went, leaving the children with a trusted neighbor, and rode into Cheyenne together. The city had grown since she had last seen it, new buildings rising where old ones had stood, the streets busier and more prosperous. She walked down the main street holding Fletcher's arm, her heart pounding, waiting for someone to point and shout, to recognize her and call for the law. But no one looked at her twice. She was just another respectable rancher's wife in a nice dress and hat, shopping with her husband. They passed the saloon where it had happened, long since renamed and remodeled, and Willow paused outside, remembering that night with the clarity of nightmare. The rage on the dead man's face, Samuel's terror, the weight of the gun, the sound of the shot echoing forever in her memory. "I killed a man here," she said quietly. "Changed the course of my entire life with one pull of a trigger." Fletcher squeezed her hand. "You saved your brother and yourself. That is not killing, that is survival. And everything that came after, everything we have built, it would not exist if you had not been brave enough to do what needed doing, and then brave enough to keep going." She turned to look at him, this man who had given her everything, who had lied to federal marshals and risked his own freedom to protect her. "Do you ever regret it? Taking me in, hiding me, marrying me knowing what I had done?" "Never. Not for one single second." Fletcher cupped her face in his hands, his storm cloud eyes fierce with conviction. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Willow. You and our children and this life we have made. I would do it all again, would lie to 1,000 marshals, would hide you beneath every floorboard in Wyoming if that was what it took to keep you. She kissed him there on the street in Cheyenne, not caring who saw, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they finally broke apart, she felt lighter somehow, as if the weight of that long-ago night had finally lifted from her shoulders. Willow Bennett was truly gone, laid to rest with the past where she belonged. Only Willow Vance remained, and she had a beautiful life waiting back on the ranch. They stayed in Cheyenne for 2 days, exploring the city, dining in restaurants, attending a theater performance. It felt like a honeymoon, a celebration of survival and love and the distance they had traveled from that desperate night 12 years ago. On the train ride home, Willow sat with her head on Fletcher's shoulder, watching the Wyoming landscape roll past the window, and felt a deep, abiding peace. The children greeted them with shrieks of joy when they returned. Caroline and Thomas and the twins all talking over each other about everything that had happened while they were gone. Fletcher scooped up the twins, one in each arm, while Caroline and Thomas hung on his legs, and Willow watched her family with a full heart. This was what mattered. This was what she had survived for, fought for, lied and hidden and remade herself for. This love, this joy, this home. The years continued their steady march. Caroline grew into a young woman as skilled with horses as her father, earning a reputation throughout the territory for her training abilities. Thomas took over more of the ranch management, proving himself a shrewd businessman with his father's fairness and his mother's determination. The twins were inseparable, always getting into mischief, keeping everyone laughing with their antics. Fletcher's hair went gray at the temples. Willow found lines around her eyes from years of squinting into the sun. But they still stole kisses in the barn and held hands on the porch, still loved each other with the fierce devotion of newlyweds. In 1895, Thomas married a schoolteacher from Evanston, a kind young woman named Elizabeth who fit seamlessly into the family. They built a house on the ranch property, near enough to help with the work, but far enough to have their own space. Caroline remained unmarried, devoted to her horses and uninterested in the young men who came courting, and Fletcher respected her choice, knowing his daughter had the same independent spirit as her mother. The twins, now 14, were starting to show interest in different paths, Matthew wanting to learn veterinary medicine, Daniel considering law school in Denver. Willow sat on the porch one evening in early autumn, watching the sun set over the ranch that had become her whole world. Fletcher was in the barn doing a final check on the horses. Thomas and Elizabeth were at their own home. Caroline was training a young filly in the round pen, and the twins were supposedly doing homework inside, but more likely getting into something they should not. It was an ordinary evening, unremarkable in every way except that it was part of a life she had built from ashes and fear and desperate hope. Fletcher emerged from the barn and crossed the yard to join her, lowering himself into the chair beside hers with a soft groan. "Getting old," he muttered, rubbing his knee. "We both are," Willow said with a smile, taking his hand. "But I would not trade a single day, even the hard ones." "No." Fletcher looked at her, his eyes still that piercing gray despite the years. "Not even the day the Marshals came. Especially not that day. That was the day I knew for certain you would do anything for me, that you loved me enough to risk everything. That was the day I stopped running and started living." Fletcher lifted her hand to his lips, a gesture he had repeated thousands of times over the years, and that still made her heart flutter. "I would do it again right now. Hide you beneath the floorboards, lie to their faces, protect you with everything I have. You are mine," Willow Vance, and I protect what is mine." She thought about that hidden space beneath the floorboards, how dark and terrifying it had been, how her heart had hammered listening to Fletcher spin his careful lies to the Marshals. She thought about emerging into the light, about Fletcher's face looking down at her with such fierce protectiveness, that she had known, even then, that she could trust him with her life. That moment had been the foundation of everything that came after, the seed from which their entire life together had grown. "I love you," she said simply, the words containing all the complexity of their shared history, the danger they had faced, the family they had built, the decades they had weathered together. "I love you too," Fletcher replied. "Always have, always will." They sat together as the stars emerged overhead, the ranch settling into its nighttime rhythms around them. Caroline finished with the filly and headed inside, calling good night. The twins finally appeared, sheepish about some minor disaster involving spilled ink and homework, and Fletcher handled it with patient authority. Willow watched her family, counted her blessings, and knew that she was exactly where she belonged. In 1902, Caroline finally married, a surprising development that happened when a horse buyer from Montana arrived, and proceeded to spend 2 weeks arguing with her about training methods before abruptly proposing. She accepted, much to everyone's surprise, and they married in the spring with the whole territory seemingly in attendance. Thomas and Elizabeth had 3 children by then, and the ranch was thriving under their combined management. Matthew had finished veterinary school and opened a practice in Evanston, splitting his time between the town and the ranch. Daniel had become a lawyer in Denver but visited often, bringing his fiancée home to meet the family. Fletcher and Willow became grandparents many times over, their house filling with the sound of children's laughter, their table always crowded at holidays. They slowed down as the years accumulated, letting the younger generation take over more of the work, but they still rode out together on mild days, still checked on the horses together, still made all the big decisions as a partnership. The ranch had become an institution, known throughout the West, and people spoke of Fletcher and Willow Vance with respect and admiration. One evening in the summer of 1908, 30 years after Willow had first ridden into Evanston on a stolen horse with blood on her hands and fear in her heart, she and Fletcher sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Fletcher was 70 now, his hair completely white, his movements slower but still strong. Willow was 65, her dark hair streaked with silver, her hands gnarled from decades of work but still capable. "You remember the day we met?" Fletcher asked, his voice carrying the rough edge of age. "Every detail," Willow replied. "You came out of the stable looking stern and suspicious, and I thought you were going to send me away. I was terrified." "I was terrified too. Terrified of how much I wanted you to stay, how much I needed you even though I had just met you. I knew right then you were going to change my life." Fletcher turned to look at her, his storm cloud eyes still sharp despite the years. "Best decision I ever made letting you stay, best risk I ever took, even when you had to hide me and lie to federal marshals, especially then. That was when I knew I would do anything for you, face any consequence, take any risk. You were worth it then, and you are worth it now, and you will be worth it until the day I die." Willow felt tears prick her eyes, the easy tears of old age and deep emotion. "I was so lost when I came here. So afraid and alone. You gave me a home, Fletcher. You gave me a family and a life and love I never thought I would have. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Fletcher corrected gently. "I was just existing before you came, going through the motions. You gave me a reason to live again, gave me joy and purpose and more love than any one man deserves." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Their grandchildren played, their children worked around the ranch, and everything Fletcher and Willow had built together stretched out around them in solid, permanent beauty. The ranch would continue after they were gone, passed down through the generations, their legacy living on in the horses and the land and the family that would carry their names and stories forward. In 1912, Fletcher's health began to decline. He developed a cough that would not go away, that slowly worsened despite the doctor's best efforts. By autumn, he was confined mostly to the house, and by winter, he rarely left his bed. Willow tended him with the same fierce devotion he had always shown her, sitting beside him for hours, reading to him, holding his hand, reminding him of their life together. Their children and grandchildren visited constantly, filling the house with life and noise, and Fletcher smiled through his pain, surrounded by the family he had created with Willow. On a cold January morning in 1913, with snow falling soft outside the window and Willow holding his hand, Fletcher drew his last breath. He went peacefully, a slight smile on his face, and Willow sat beside him for a long time afterward, memorizing his features, saying goodbye to the man who had been her salvation and her great love. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, where he could see the horses he had loved and the land he had worked for decades. The funeral drew people from all over Wyoming and beyond, a testament to the respect Fletcher had earned in his 75 years. Willow stood at the graveside supported by her children, and she did not cry, not yet. She would have time for tears later, in the privacy of the bedroom they had shared, when the house was quiet and she had to face the reality of life without him. But Fletcher had taught her how to keep going, how to survive grief and loss and still find reasons to live. She had their children and grandchildren, had the ranch they had built together, had 35 years of memories to sustain her through the lonely times ahead. She was Willow Vance, and she was stronger than she knew, because Fletcher had believed in her strength even when she did not. Willow lived another 10 years without Fletcher, years filled with watching her family grow and thrive, with grandchildren getting married and having children of their own. She remained sharp and capable until the very end, still offering advice on training horses, still making decisions about the ranch, still telling stories about the old days to anyone who would listen. She spoke often of Fletcher, keeping his memory alive, making sure everyone knew what kind of man he had been, what he had done for her, how much he had loved them all. On a warm May morning in 1923, Willow passed away in her sleep at the age of 80. She was buried beside Fletcher on the hill, their graves marked with simple stones bearing their names and dates, and the words "together always" carved beneath. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, celebrating a life well lived, a love that had endured everything, a legacy that would continue for generations. The story became part of family lore, passed down through the decades. How Willow had arrived at the ranch desperate and hunted, how Fletcher had hidden her beneath the floorboards when the Marshals came, how he had lied to their faces to protect her, how that act of courage and love had been the foundation of everything that followed. The story was told at family gatherings, around dinner tables, to new generations who marveled at their ancestors' bravery and devotion. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through Fletcher and Willow's descendants, a living memorial to what they had built together from desperation and hope. And somewhere in the old house, now preserved and maintained by the family as a heritage site, the loose board beneath the rug in the storage room remained, a reminder of the day love chose courage over law, when a cowboy rancher looked at a desperate woman and decided she was worth any risk, any lie, any consequence. The space beneath those floorboards had held a fugitive for only a few minutes, but it had protected something far more precious: the possibility of a future, the chance at redemption, and the beginning of a love story that would echo through time. Their love had survived marshals and secrets and the harsh realities of frontier life. It had created a family and a legacy that endured long after they were gone. And it had all begun with one desperate woman, one compassionate man, a hidden space beneath the floorboards, and the courage to lie when telling the truth would have destroyed everything that mattered. It was a love story for the ages, set against the backdrop of the Wild West, a testament to the power of choosing mercy over judgment, protection over punishment, and love over everything else.